Painting with colour, contrast, exposure and clarity. Now what do I mean by that? Well, it's using the masks in Photoshop's Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, along with my own interpretation of the scene, to create the colour, contrast, exposure and clarity that I want. But I have to do that from the colour, contrast, exposure and clarity that I was able to capture at the time. We're in the right place at the right time, although we are only just seconds away from the sun breaking into view and our dawn shoot being brought to an abrupt end. The contrast will then rapidly get away from us, and it's just beginning to show in the centre of the frame just above the horizon. Our manipulations will make that a little worse. Now, I never use graduated filters at all. I'll use exposure bracketing if I feel I have to. But here the raw file has all I need. I've exposed for the shadows, but without allowing the highlights to escape me. This, as you can see by the changes in the image, is my starting point, my overall global editing of the image, mostly concentrating on the bottom third. I started with colour balance, temperature and tint. There's no mysteries here, I just increased both of those to get the colour which looked right to me. The exposure I've reduced just a little bit, dropped down the highlights a little bit, and I've opened up the shadows. Moving the white slider to the right, but making sure that I don't start to burn out any highlights any more than I can cope with. We keep an eye on the histogram at the top right and make sure the clipping warnings don't come on to highlight that sort of problem. And the same with the blacks. Of course, moving the whites and the blacks gives us more contrast, as does clarity. That deals, I think, more with the mid-tone contrast, but as you can see, I just added a little bit of dehaze and a healthy slug of vibrance. Now we need to turn our attention to those masks, as many as is required. Starting with the bottom gradient, as you can see here, and all I've done is added a little increase in exposure just to see some detail in that sand, and also just a little increase in the temperature. Now we turn our attention to the sky, and with these masks we can select the sky, but one of my favourites remain the graduated mask. And as you can see here, it incorporates small changes in exposure, highlights and blacks, but it does make quite a difference to the image. This change begins to balance the top of the image better with the bottom, which is what we're looking for. The next stage is to add a linear gradient to both the left-hand side of the image and the right. And the idea of that, if you look across to the right, is just to drop the exposure, just to hold the image in better on that left and right hand side. All I needed was a slight reduction in exposure. Now these are small changes, but when we see them turned on and off, we can appreciate they're adding to our theme here of painting with colour, contrast, exposure and clarity. Now I'm adding a second linear gradient to the top of the sky. Now this is to darken it and to balance the top section better with the base. We can't always create this subtle editing with just one linear gradient. Once again, this isn't a very big change, but we do now have 5 masks and they're all building up together. How do I know what to do and when? Well, I just deal with the weak areas as I notice them, and I deal with them one at a time. It's as simple as that. Now, if we look in the centre of the screen just above the horizon, there are some highlights which are not significant, but we can deal with them, and deal with them we should. I'm going to use my brush, so I'm going to select a brush. I'm going to hold my control key and zoom in quite a bit. We'll start with that one there. What I want to do is to drop the highlights, so I'm going to make those adjustments before I do any brushing. A little bit of exposure down as well. You'll notice the flow of the brush is around about 20-25%, so it's not too fierce. I'm going to make my brush about the size I need for each job I'm going to do, and then I can gently brush away. If I need to reduce the brush size, I can do that with the bracket keys to the right of the letter P. And as you can see, with just a little bit of care, I can deal with every single one of these highlights. Now, as we take a quick look at the start and finished image, my title here of painting with colour, contrast, exposure and clarity may make a little more sense. I'm a great believer in keeping image editing simple. It's just a series of small steps. I'll see you next time.